For Timor-Leste, international law is not just an abstract concept. International law is the bedrock upon which we build our independence. International law inspired us to fight for the right to vote of self-determination. International law created the United Nations, where I spent many years pacing the corridors and speaking in the General Assembly, drawing the world's attention to the resistance struggle in our small half-island state. And it was the United Nations that initiated talks with Portugal and Indonesia in the 1990s that eventually led to Indonesia's withdrawal and our people voting for independence in the historic ballot on 30 August 1999. The United Nations has been with us since the birth of our nation, and we are thankful for the contribution it has made to our development. The United Nations is one of the most critical platforms for shaping global governance. It is not, however, perfect. It continues to suffer from structural imbalances. The Security Council is dominated by a handful of nations, some of whom wield their power to obstruct meaningful reform and uphold their own strategic interests rather than global peace. Yet, despite these flaws, the United Nations and international law are vitally important for small states. International law operates on the principle that all states, regardless of size or power, are equal. It is because international law treats all nations equally that we can assert our sovereignty, negotiate treaties, and participate in international organizations on the same legal footing as larger powers. It is because international law treats all nations equally, the small states can resolve disputes peacefully and with legal backing, often against more powerful adversaries in the international courts and arbitration bodies. Timor-Leste dramatically demonstrated this in the compulsory conciliation with Australia under the auspices of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. It was Malta, the smallest nation at the time, that opened the door to the pathway to UNCLOS. Malta is a small island state in the Mediterranean Sea between Sicily and North Africa. In 1967, just 3 years after it gained independence from Britain, Malta's ambassador to the UN, Arvid Pardo, addressed the General Assembly and called for a law that would act as a constitution of the oceans. Ambassador Pardo compared the competitive scramble for sovereign rights over the seabed to the colonial scramble for territory in Asia and Africa. His powerful speech ultimately led to the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, one of the UN's most ambitious and successful conventions. 158 nations participated in the third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea, which held 11 sessions between 1973 and 1982. It was the longest, most complex, and one of the most important treaty-making negotiations in world history. The end result is a code of law for the seas, Ambassador Pardo's dream of a constitution for the ocean. It was a major international effort to define the rights and duties of nations in the use of the world's oceans, an area that covers over 70% of the Earth's surface. Some of the debates during the negotiation of UNCLOS, like the climate change debate today, were between developing and developed nations. Developing countries argue that the traditional rules governing the oceans were imposed by the developed world and that a new ocean regime was necessary to reduce inequities in the development and exploitation of marine resources. While the developing countries didn't win all the arguments, the fact that 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone concept is in UNCLOS Despite opposition from the world's two global powers at the time, the United States and the Soviet Union, speaks to the equity of the UN processes, or at least this UN process. The success of the campaign led by Indonesia for the inclusion of the archipelagic principle in the convention was another win for developing countries and the global south, given 4 of the 5 archipelagic states are south of the equator: the Philippines, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and the Bahamas as the outlier. The Convention provides the legal framework for maritime governance, delineating the rights and responsibilities of nations regarding the use of the world's oceans, the protection of the marine environment, the right of all states to pursue peaceful uses of the seas, and for resolving maritime disputes. It is the relevant governing framework on how activities in the ocean and seas must be carried out to address the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. The Convention also provided for the establishment of the International Seabed Authority, the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, presided over by Judge Thomas Hyder, our honored guest with us today. And of particular significance for my country, Timor-Leste, the Convention includes provisions for compulsory conciliation under Article 298 and Annex 5. UNCLOS foresaw this situation where a neighboring country has withdrawn from the binding dispute settlement procedures under the Convention, as our maritime neighbor across the sea, Australia, did on the eve of our independence in 2002, and then refuses to negotiate permanent maritime boundaries, as Australia did for a decade and a half. For coastal states in this situation, the Convention offers the avenue of compulsory conciliation as a last resort to facilitate a resolution. The mechanism was designed to ensure that no maritime boundary dispute is left unresolved in the interest of international peace and security. The compulsory conciliation provisions of the Convention were untested. We were fortunate to have 2 of the most esteemed law of the sea barristers advising us: Vaughan Lowy, QC, Professor in Public International Law at Oxford University, and Sir Michael Wood, KCMG, KC, former Chief Legal Advisor of the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I'm not going to say anything further about the conciliation process. I leave that to the experts during the forum, and we have an abundance of experts at this conference. At this afternoon panel session on lessons learned from the Timor Sea conciliation, you will hear from the Chair of Conciliation Commission, His Excellency Ambassador Peter Paxen Jansen, Ambassador of Denmark to Italy. In another session, we will hear reflections on the conciliation from his fellow conciliator, Judge Rudiger Wolfram from Germany, Judge Abdul Koroma from Sierra Leone, who is here. We know each other since we both were very young in New York. And that's how long we know each other, at least 40 years, when he was chairman one time of the Special Committee on Colonization, of the Fourth Committee, and later a judge in ICJ. Welcome, my brother, my friend. Thank you. He still looks much younger than me, although he's much older. We are truly honored to have you all join our conference, and we are very pleased to get your first-hand insight into the conciliation process. The conference is also an opportunity to explore the origins, ramifications of recent unanimous advisory opinion of the International Law on the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea on the request submitted to the Tribunal by the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law. The tribunal clarified the states party to UNCLOS have a specific obligation to prevent, reduce, and control pollution, including greenhouse emissions and their detrimental effects on the marine environment. Significantly, the tribunal concluded that these obligations go beyond existing commitments to address and mitigate climate change impacts under the Paris Agreement. This was the first time an international court or tribunal has addressed states' obligation to combat climate change within the UNCLOS framework. Timor-Leste was a party to the request, and we welcome the tribunal's advisory opinion. Our friends from the Pacific, no doubt, were particularly delighted, given the existential threat they face from global sea rises. We look forward with great anticipation to the pending International Court of Justice advisory opinion on climate change. Dear friends, we live in increasingly uncertain and challenging times. We are facing a global climate crisis. We have the breakdown of the global financial system. We are witness to horrendous international conflicts between Russia and Ukraine, Israel and Palestine, and escalating tensions between India and Pakistan. The global rules-based system has so far failed to bring these conflicts to an end or to prevent them from actually started. In our region, we enjoy relative peace, but we cannot be complacent. There are tensions on Korean Peninsula and in the South China Sea. In the past, I have joined all others in calling for consultations on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea to be intensified. Active dialogue and bilateral negotiations between claimant states of the South China Sea must be intensified and conducted in good faith. We have at this conference a unique gathering of experts on international law of the sea from around the globe. This conference is an opportunity to explore and celebrate global legal cooperation. It is an opportunity for Timor-Leste to demonstrate our commitment to peace and the rule of law. It is an opportunity to work together to uphold international law and safeguard our oceans. Thank you for your participation. And I would like to introduce to everyone our new president of the Court of Appeal, which exercises the functions of our Supreme Court, Dr. Carmona, who is here attending, and also introduce, I presume he's also here, our new Prosecutor General, who was appointed, sworn in just a few days ago, Dr. Nelson Carvalho. Thank you, my friend from Iceland, for taking the time to come all the way from a beautiful Iceland. Although I know you're based in Hamburg, I've been to Iceland in the past many times, both in the winter and in the summer. And I was advised then by Icelandic friends, if you get lost in the jungle of Iceland, just stand up. Everybody will see you. Because they actually don't have any